And I just wanted to take this opportunity once again, for those of you who may have missed Thursday night or Friday morning, to thank my co-chair, Yair Myers, who does not get to be in the forefront, but has done so much work for all of this and so many other things, as you probably know, for TBDJ as our volunteer extraordinaire. And so I wanted to highlight him this morning. I also wanted to thank the rabbi and Rivki for their leadership in this very challenging time, and especially for always supporting us with this mental health Shabbat. We had no idea how this would go, this virtual mental health Shabbat, and it's been, in my opinion, a very big success. We've got wonderful feedback. And of course, we want to thank Dr. Blumenthal, whom the rabbi will introduce in a moment. I wanted to take one final opportunity to wish a very happy Mother's Day to my mother, who I believe is watching this morning and whom I am sad that I cannot see and be with and hug and give flowers to. But of course, she'll be receiving a gift later. And of course, my mother-in-law, whom we will very excitedly see from the sidewalk later, and wish all the mothers happy Mother's Day. So thank you everybody for attending this morning, and I pass it over to the rabbi to introduce Dr. Blumenthal.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is so nice to see everyone on a Sunday morning. Again, a happy Mother's Day to all as well. I also firstly just want to echo the words that we just heard and thank, first of all, Dr. Goodman-Aspler. Rachel, thank you for all of your efforts together with Yair. The two of you, again, your vision and your passion has brought this to the place that it is, and it is an entirely tribute to the two of you for making this happen, as well as thank you to the behind-the-scenes people, to Hoodie Aspler, to Naftali Jacobs, who have really made this happen behind the scenes. Thank you both for all of your efforts. Dr. Blumenthal, thank you. It's been an amazing experience so far. For those of you, if you did not hear, Thursday night I had the opportunity to listen to the Friday presentation to the students. It was really, really very special, as well as the message that you sent out on Friday afternoon. We really, really wish we could have hosted you in person, and look forward to the opportunity to do so again sometime soon. This is the best that we have, and it's been an amazing experience for us, and we look forward to the opportunity to having you again. I just want to mention one other thing before the formal introduction, and that is this program, this morning's program, is part of our special new initiative. The Gewurz Family Foundation, in conjunction with Yeshiva University, have partnered with TBDJ to bring in a number of scholars and residents yearly, and this program, Sunday morning, is part of that initiative. So we'd very much like to thank the Gewurz family for sponsoring this program, and I want to take the opportunity to make mention of the special scholarship that they have very graciously funded for students from Montreal to attend Yeshiva University or Stern University. Please be in touch with me to get further information. If you have a high school student preparing for university, there is a very wonderful Gewurz Family Foundation scholarship available for that. And this is a wonderful opportunity for our community to continue to partner with Yeshiva University and develop the Jewish leadership of the future. So thank you to the Gewurz family, thank you to Yeshiva University, thank you to Rachel and to Yair, and thank you to Dr. Blumenthal. We are very excited formally just to acknowledge again, licensed clinical psychologist in the New York area who's been heading the trauma team for OHEL and been on the forefront of addressing the impact of calamitous events and losses in the Jewish community, including the Pittsburgh shootings, the Houston floods, the Malibu fires, and the assaults in Jersey City and Muncie. And what is of great interest to me on a personal level, he has been very involved in the Yeshiva University Pastoral Counseling Program, training the rabbis of the future to be able to do what they need to be able to do to handle grief and trauma. And we very much thank you for all that you're doing for the Jewish community as a whole and for being with us over Shabbos and this morning. Without any further ado, thank you all for being with us. And thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. And, I don't want to overdo it with the thank yous because everybody already covered all my thank yous. But I do want to, again, reiterate my thank you, Rabbi. And again, with your indulgence, to the extent that I will reference Torah sources, I'm doing so, since you are far more deserving to discuss Torah issues. I want to thank Rachel, who really, again, I do quite a bit of scholar in residence and visits, etc., and very rarely has been such effort put in to make sure that it works so well. And talking about effort being within, we have to always thank our tech guys, most notably Naftali Jacobs and Judah Espler and Yair Myers, who, again, guys my age really appreciate those who help us with technology, since we're the immigrants, and of course you are the natives. And resonate with what everybody else is saying, and wishing happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. If there ever was a time that we have to be appreciative of mothers, and of all different stages of life, whether it's the mothers who are homeschooling and keeping children entertained at home, or there are mothers who are unfortunately separated from their children and grandchildren and are trying as much as possible to maintain the contact. This is a time where we have to appreciate them and extend ourselves to them. I also want to thank the community for your hospitality. I've been doing scholar and residence events now, I have to say 20, 25 years. And in all the years that I have been visiting communities, never have I felt as much at home as I did during this scholar and residence event. So I really commend you for your hospitality. I do look forward. I have many reasons to come visit you, and I do look forward to coming and visit you in person. I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes and have some time for questions and answers. And I would probably say that you could probably divide what I'm going to talk about into two broad categories. I'm going to share with you what it's been like for me these past few weeks, where I have to say that 75 to 90% of my time has been addressing this COVID-19 crisis and addressing the needs of the community, needs of individuals, heavily involved recently with the bereavement piece. I'm doing 3 bereavement groups a week now, remotely, obviously, for people who have lost parents. OHIL itself is also running a group for people who lost siblings, and another, besides the one I'm running, another parent group, and we have a waiting list. We're going to have to start another bunch, and we're about to start one for widows. So this has been a very big part of my time, and I'm not going to always provide answers. I'm going to present the issues, some of the considerations, some approaches that we have that may be helpful. That'll be first half, and the second half I want to start being a little bit prophetic and trying to think, where are we going to go from here? What's it going to be like? Well, how are we going to emerge from this crisis? And I don't have answers for that. As I like to quote the great philosopher and theologian, Yogi Berra, who said prognosticating is very difficult, especially about the future. And we can't prognosticate. But I want to raise the questions because we should be thinking about that. So I want to pose it. And I also welcome you to give your input and your thoughts once I conclude. So I mentioned on Friday, there's been an interesting progression in terms of this crisis. At first, and I would have to say I'm dating myself now to a little bit before Purim, maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe more, like about 7, 8 weeks ago, more so, maybe 9 weeks ago. But the initial response was probably to some extent minimized initially, and I was presented with 2 very prominent infectious disease people who have been incredibly important in terms of the community managing the issue now. But at that point, their position was, this is the flu, like the flu, and we have to be careful, don't touch your face, wash your hands. But let's not panic. We're managing, and the flu exists. The flu sometimes is unfortunately fatal, but for the most part, it's manageable, and we shouldn't be overly anxious. And my role was very much to try to keep people's anxiety commensurate with the level of threat, and focus on how to teach children how to practice hygiene and how to avoid touching one's face. I remember I cited a study that a person touches his face on the average 28 times a day. And how do we minimize that? How do we change our own habits, etc. Then it kind of hit us that this is a little bit more than the flu, and that this is really originally epidemic, pandemic, and everybody's shifted gears. The physicians, and of course, all those of us in mental health had to shift gears as well. And there was much more urgency, and then we started addressing the very unprecedented and destabilizing issue of quarantine and fear of illness and the contagious spread, the rapid spread of this illness. And there were initially fairly frantic efforts to try to preserve our communal life, and some very creative efforts in setting up homeschooling and having contact and visiting each other outside. And there was almost like a freneticism. There was almost like a real energized kind of effort to preserve that communal life. And even in anticipation, I have to say unrealistically, that this is something very quickly we're going to have to deal with, and we'll get back to our life as it had been previously. And then there was a big shift. And I would say I'm observing now, which I think is a little bit where we are now. Maybe we're emerging from it. But we kind of realized, first of all, that this is not going to be over so quickly. And we got into sort of a lull. We started getting used to being home. People started acclimating to it. There was, even though there's still activity online and still there were efforts to, especially with regard to children, I'll talk about that soon in terms of keeping them entertained and busy, but we sort of acclimated. Now, that's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, that's the amazing capacity of human beings to adjust to very difficult circumstances. I often mention, I think I mentioned it Friday, I live in the 5 towns. We're right near JFK. In fact, there's a rabbi here in the community that says when Mashiach comes, we'll be the first to go because we're right by JFK. But I don't hear the airplanes. We adapt to that. We acclimate. My father, Alav Shalom, who was in the leather business for over 30 years, and the office had that strong smell of fresh leather, couldn't smell leather. Even years later, he was retired for about 30 years before he died. And he had no smell. It's like you acclimate, what's unusual becomes typical, almost not noticed. And to some extent, that's where we got into. I said it's a double-edged sword. It reduces the anxiety, although on the other hand, though, it's going to make it harder to get back into communal life, which I'm going to talk about soon, because now we have to reacclimate, and the research on people who have been quarantined does demonstrate that when the quarantine is over, they don't just jump right back into communal life. It really takes an adjustment and a readaptation that doesn't always happen so quickly. The other thing that I've seen that I'm going to get to soon is the grief situation as more and more people die, and the complication of grief without a real levaya, without a real burial, without real shiva, without kaddish, and all that is missing, and the weeks of illness with nobody visiting. And then there's a restlessness also. Some people are just about had it with this quarantine and social distancing, which in some respects is also good. We shouldn't be acclimated. We shouldn't be happy with it. We should preserve that sense that this is abnormal. This is not what we want our lives to be. On the other hand, though, unfortunately, and these tend to be a little bit more of the impulsive people, the people by nature are more restless, they're starting to take risks. They're starting to rush back into a social life, perhaps without social distancing, without the necessary precautions, and therefore jeopardizing our recovery as a broader community. So these are the types of things that I'm seeing. There's interesting issues coming up, and I want to bring them up, and I think just for food for thought. One of them is, at least we're seeing in New York, I'm not sure if you're seeing it in Montreal, but there are a lot of people, particularly younger people, but young families in particular, who are now rushing to Florida, are now feeling like we're stuck home. There's apparently some great deals in some of the communities where there are these like very nice homes that you can rent because people aren't coming down. So they're renting these homes and they're mostly driving down to Florida. And their position is, and I'm not disputing it, have to be stuck home. Let me be stuck home someplace very pleasant with a swimming pool and large, an arcade room, and the kids are kept entertained more, and they're homeschooled anyway. What difference does it make where they are? But interestingly enough, some people take umbrage on that. And some people are feeling like, there are a lot of people that have lost their jobs. There are a lot of people that are suffering. There's a lot of people who are suffering because of the illness. There's a lot of people who have suffered terrible losses. And maybe now's not the time, even if you've been, thank God, spared this hardship, maybe now's not the time to go and engage in such frivolous recreational activities. So it's an interesting, maybe not even so much psychological question, but maybe a sort of sociological, personal, maybe even a sort of morality kind of question is, do you, when the world is hurting and when there's so much hardship and pain, do you detract from your own pleasure and pain, or should you, why should you do that? Why should you deprive yourself? There's no great benefit in deprivation. It's interesting situation. The rabbi mentioned that I and my predecessor in this weekend, Dr. David Pelkovitz, trained rabbis at Yeshiva University. And we have teachers course in pastoral psychology and bereavement. We do role playing. I mean, the guys are incredibly well prepared for much of the pastoral role of the rabbi. And as I mentioned previously, everybody's roles are changing nowadays. But when it first broke, we did dedicate a class to discussing, the implications and the ramifications of this quarantine, of this illness. And then the question came up is maybe we should dedicate more time. That maybe we should put aside some of the topics that we're covering in the various classes and give the time for the young men to process this, understand it, study what's happening to themselves and to the community. So we sort of put out a survey, not a formal survey, but we just sort of put it out there. So, ask the guys, well, we want your feedback. You want to continue discussing the coronavirus, or do you want to go on with our topics? And I wouldn't say it was just the majority. Overwhelmingly, the guys said, let's get back to work. We want to get back to the subjects. Back. So they clearly wanted to hold on to the life they had, and with the anticipation of it's being continued. And I think that's very much a part of what's happening now. One of the issues that is again, just so painful and for which we don't have great solutions are some of the normal milestones, events in life, both happy and sad, that are now being significantly compromised, if not precluded altogether. Young couples that are supposed to be getting married, supposed to have weddings, and are having, compromised Zoom weddings, if you will. Young men who are having bar mitzvahs, young women who are supposed to have bat mitzvahs. In fact, my grandson was supposed to have his bar mitzvah on Shabbos HaGadol. We obviously couldn't have it. We had a Tuesday night Zoom bar mitzvah, and at one point my daughter muted everybody, and he was able to do his laning. And afterwards, the Rabbi Glasser in the Gizor Passaic was speaking, and he said he's never heard the shul so quiet during Kriyas HaTorah. He wants to know whether he can get that mute button for whenever he comes back to shul. But it's not, I'm sure, what he had anticipated as he spent a year studying his parsha. And we still have the candy that was supposed to be thrown at him here in our house. It's it is really sad. And then on the flip side, as I mentioned earlier, that people who lose loved ones can't give them the kavod acharon, the last respects, pay back parents for everything that they've done for them in a way that we can when we honor them at their death with a very respectable funeral and burial, saying Kaddish. These are terrible deprivations. And I think we have to be careful about two things. One thing I think we have to be careful about is, especially with children or young people, is to minimize it. And I'm hearing from many of the kids, parents are saying to eighth graders, when you're our age, your eighth grade trip is not the biggest thing in the world. And in a way, they're right. I mean, I think if I had gotten to the place where I am today and did not have that eighth grade trip to Washington, D.C., I doubt I would be all that different. But to an eighth grader, it's very important. And to an eighth grader, it is a highlighted event, a red letter day in their growing up. And a lot of these activities that we may, from our perspective, look back and say, well, they're really luxuries. They're not so essential and integral. They really are. In today's world, sleepaway camp is an integral part of a child's upbringing, and it is an integral part of shaping children. And I'd say even for myself, when I think back, and it was more years ago than I care to think, but when I think back to my times in sleepaway camp, it very much shaped me in a very positive way. It was a time for being outdoors, communing with nature, socially developing, more independence, relying less on structure and on adult supervision. And it was a really very important part, and I think it is a very important part for our children, and the fact that they may have to miss the camp experience this summer, which I think looks likely, although not for sure, is significant, and not one that we should minimize. And certainly those are missing weddings and bar mitzvahs and graduations. These are very important parts of their lives, and we shouldn't try to undo it. And I'm going to get back to this. A lot of the work I'm doing is commiserating. A lot of the work I'm doing is just acknowledging and validating how painful and terrible this is, not trying to undo the pain. Because there are many situations where you do a lot more good validating the pain than trying to do away for it. And I think that's the message I'm giving to the young people. This is terrible. It's really unfortunate. There's something very important in your life. It's not life and death, and you'll be able to have a full and meaningful life without it. But there's something very important missing now in your childhood, and I'm not going to make believe like it's something trivial and passing, and I think that's a very important position we should take. The other thing I think that's important, as we try to make it up by having Zoom weddings, Zoom bar mitzvahs, Zoom graduations, or for that matter, Zoom shivas, we have to be careful not to try to make it like it would be if everybody was together, but adapt it to the realities of Zoom. And I think that those that work are those that make a Zoom wedding, not try to make a real wedding, but we just happen to be on Zoom. It's interesting, I once read an article about the Wright brothers and why were they able to invent the airplane, and nobody else was. For years and years, people were trying. And there was a very interesting point that was made, that what they did was, till then, people were trying to get machines to fly like birds, and it didn't work. They tried to get a machine to fly like a machine, and it worked. The same thing with Big Blue, the computer that was supposed to compete in chess. For many years, they could not create a program in the computer that could beat the chess masters, until they finally realized they're trying to get the computer to play chess like a person. And when they finally got the computer to play chess like a computer, it was unbeatable. And the same thing is true. We can't try to have a bar mitzvah that has all the trappings of a regular bar mitzvah, but to do it on Zoom. We have to be creative, and we're being incredibly creative, that we have a bar mitzvah that is a Zoom bar mitzvah, or for that matter, a shiva. It's not the same having a shiva face-to-face as it is having a Zoom shiva. And we need to adapt it, and in fact, I'll talk about that later, how I think we can, to make it more adaptive to the Zoom. Another interesting subgroup that's having a hard time is the singles who are dating, especially those within our community who are dating, not recreationally, but are dating to get married and feel ready at this point. Let's assume it's not just communal pressure, but they're at a station in their life where they feel ready to engage in this courtship process and they want to get married, and dating with social distancing is complicated. Initially, there was an effort to have Zoom dating, and most of the young people rejected. Most of the young people found that it really just didn't work. They didn't feel like it was a way to date. Maybe some think maybe the first date where you can just get just getting a general sense of compatibility and interest, but past that, the Zoom dating is not working. And now they're doing backyard dating, which, 6 feet apart, which is working better, but it is compromised. And it's complicated as well, that a time of crisis is not always the best time to look for a lifelong partner. Some people have done some of the contact, some people have reached out to me or to OHEL, have discussed situations where they're at a sort of critical juncture in their dating, and the person they're dating lost a parent and are just not themselves. And do you continue dating? Do you put it on hold and get back together? Do you call it off because it's just that person is just not in a psychological state right now to date? There's a very interesting study that was done a number of years ago. It's often referred to as the Shaky bridge study. Many of you may be familiar with it. What they did was they took a female research assistant, someone who was a young, fairly attractive female research assistant, and had her walk halfway across the bridge. And then they had a man walk the other halfway across the bridge. I mean, maybe, today's standards in terms of feminism attraction, that some people might take objection to this, but this was done a number of years ago. And it was the man's job then, when they met in the middle of the bridge, to assess how attractive this woman is. The only difference was, in one case, the bridge was steady, and the other case, it was a shaky bridge. And pretty consistently, the people on the shaky bridge assessed the woman as more attractive than was a steady bridge. Because when you feel threatened, when you feel in danger, you want human contact. Human contact is what calms us down. And I'm going to use a New York metaphor. I don't know if it applies to Montreal, but those of us who travel on the beautiful New York City subway system, and we're all there in the subway, and we're all holding on to the, to the straps and all that, and everybody has things in their ears, and they're listening to their music or shiurim or whatever. And if the train suddenly screeches to a halt between stations and the lights go off, suddenly everybody takes the things out of the ear and they're talking to each other, because when you feel threatened, you want contact with other people. So is it the right time to date when we're feeling threatened, when we feel in danger, or will there be a pressure to accelerate the process? And we have to be careful about it. And this is a lot of the considerations that we're discussing with people who are contacting us. Another subgroup that's where, believe it or not, it's difficult are the recently married or the new parents. We, OL did a group for postpartum during COVID-19. There were 116 mothers who, and that wasn't actually a group, it was more of a webinar, but 116 mothers. In fact, at one point, the person who ran the group, just for a minute, unmuted the phones, and there was all these crying babies in the background. But, you know, that's a very important point in one's adjustment to life with other people. And does it, you know, being cramped up in a small apartment. Very few people have homes at that point. So they're usually apartments, and sometimes apartments in inner city circles, whatever. You really can't go out, at least here in New York, you know, in the West Side, on the Washington Heights in Queens, or a new baby where they can't necessarily even go to the new it might be their parents' first child, and they can't just go running to the parents, let the parents hold or help out or take a night thing. They can't bring in a nurse to help them. But even in terms of the early marriage itself, or they might be in the basement of their parents/in-laws, and what that's like. And it's, you know, the way an early marriage works, the way that acclimation and getting to know each other works, is a little bit of an in and out experience. That, you know, if you think about it, that's the miracle of marriage. You know this person, you know, a few weeks maybe, or maybe a few months, and now this person has become the most important person in your life. That takes time. And when you're suddenly on top of each other and you don't really know each other, and you don't have that much to talk about because neither one of you is going to work or have the same interests, it can become problematic. And sometimes you have to sort of, even in your cramped quarters, create an opportunity to be apart and be back together and allow the relationship to develop more naturally. And this is becoming, we're getting close with couples who by all means should be apt and prepared to build that strong bond, but this is complicating it in the process. And of course, when we spoke about this also in terms of the elderly, the loneliness and the loneliness for some of the older senior citizens is very different than loneliness that we feel. Very hard necessarily to relate to, and the need to feel important, which they are, very important. And but we sometimes our lapse, the younger people sometimes you know, are not careful enough to make sure that that importance is communicated. We give them a lot of love and care, but do we treat them, and they have what to offer, especially during a crisis, because they have a lot of life experience. And that life experience, you know, they've lived through different types of travails and challenges. And sometimes they're very good resources to remind us of our own and others' resilience and the capacity to endure during difficult times. And by the way, no less important is that as inept as some of us may feel with technology is even all the more new to them. And now that we are so dependent on connection and contact through technology, how that is a further challenge for our senior citizens. Interestingly enough, there are some that are, for whom this period of time may be even advantageous. Some children for whom school is a struggle. Children with ADHD, learning disabilities, children with social challenges. The being home from school has been godsend for them, and they're much happier. People who already before the crisis had some financial challenges, difficulties, may have been laid off from jobs or facing in dead-end jobs, and now they're not alone. They're in it with a lot of other people. So there are subsets of the population for whom this is actually, as I said, a blessing in disguise. There's some but there are other positive aspects of this that I think we've already identified. I think many of us are impressed with how well Zoom is working, not only technically, but I have to say personally, and I think others have expressed this, I'm impressed at the extent to which I can help others, connect with others. It's not as perfect as being in person, But it's working. It's working. I am able to continue doing therapy. I'm able to do crisis intervention. I'm able to impart messages. I'm sure that, probably finally feels the same way. It's working pretty well. And, sometimes God, there's expression in Hebrew that God brings the refuah before the makkah, that God sometimes brings the cure before the illness. And I think the fact that social media and the internet has been developed before all this happened, I think we would just take pause and think what it would be like if we didn't have these means to connect with others, how much more difficult and how much more cut off we would feel. So this has been a pleasant surprise, and it makes me wonder, how much am I going to rely on Zoom? How much am I going to rely on Zoom contact? There's actually a lot of jocular material out there about withdrawing from Zoom and having to adjust again to actually talking to people face to face. But we may have to sort of rethink that this might be as more integral part of how we connect with others than we had in the past. And this may be also in some respects sort of a blessing in disguise. The other thing that has, I think, been incredibly impressive is some of the creativity and some of the initiatives to remain connected, and also some of the creativity and imaginative material that has been developed to keep our children occupied and to keep our children interested. And again, I don't think we should take that for granted. There are, a plethora of material online, and some of it is very imaginative, and as I said, creative, and also very imaginative ways in which people are feeling connected. I'll just give an example. Just happened now. My daughter is a teacher in a high school, and she woke up the other morning, and there was a sign, a stake put in her front yard that here is a wonderful teacher from so-and-so place. So what a real ego booster for people who are struggling, for a young woman who's struggling with raising her children and maintaining the education, maintain the connection with her children. And by the way, I want to mention one more thing in passing, but I think it's important. A lot of this, this homeschooling or remote schooling is great, but let's not get too caught up on keeping up with the material and the learning. I think the main function of this remote schooling is to maintain the connection with the school, maintain the connection with the teacher, with the Rebbe, and remind children education doesn't stop just because of a situation like this. And the actual material or content that's acquired during this time may be of secondary importance. And another thing that I think is really remarkable and needs to be discussed is some of the humor. And we're all getting these postings. Some of them are hysterically funny. And humor is a very interesting aspect of coping with difficulty. Believe it or not, even in my work with trauma and bereavement, humor is a very important way that even people who have suffered terrible losses or terrible tragedies, to be able to, in some respects, laugh about it is a very important form of adaptation. Now, when we come to humor, we have to make very important differentiations. A joke that is at the expense of someone else, that puts down someone else, that is at the expense of a subgroup of the population, especially maybe a previously or currently persecuted subset of the population, is not funny. A joke that trivializes people's suffering is not funny. But something humorous that captures the preposterousness of the situation we're in universally serves two functions. First of all, when we laugh, we feel better. So it kind of dulls the pain. But the other thing that's important is, let's dissect the joke for a second. What constitutes a joke? And if you think about it, your typical joke is that you lead someone along a certain way, and then comes the punchline, which is something totally unexpected. A joke is irony. Joke is surprise, which is why Yitzchak is named after laughter. It's not because Sarah and Abram were sitting and giggling. It was just so outlandish that a 90-year-old woman would have a baby that there was something ironic or amusing about it. So humor expresses the outlandish nature of the situation we're in, where suddenly all our plans are forestalled, where everything what we expected to do, the Pesach we expected to have, the summer we expected to have, the milestones we expected to have are suddenly just put aside. There is something in a sort of profound way that's amusing about it. And this is finding expression online, and I don't think a day goes by where there isn't something actually funny, but also it gives us expression of this outlandishness and this irony. Another fascinating part of this, which I find interesting, I'm discussing it not judgmentally, but psychologically, is how frantic people are in our community to have a minion. So much so that some have actually are breaking the laws, are breaking convention to find some way to have a minion, or they're trying to come up with these incredibly creative ways to daven b'tzibur, backyard minyanim with 6 feet apart. Apparently in Israel, my son-in-law is part of a minyan where you're sitting on your mirpeset. This was locally, our poskim, Rav Hershel Schachter, said that's not possible. It seems like they're poskim in Israel that said, no, you can do it that way. But it's interesting psychologically, of all things, why are people so desperate to have a minyan, to daven b'tzibur? It's important. I'm not denying it. I am one who davens most of the minyan, most of the shachos, mincha, and ma'ariv with a minyan. And thank God we have so many minyanim that it is so easy. But what's that? I don't see the same franticness to pay a shiv visit, to be gechol, unless it's your immediate family, to have a mezumin during a meal. Not if you don't have 3 men for Benjamin, yet somehow feel a bit tzibur. And trying to figure out ways how we can do it and still be safe. And I think it touches, I think it's become representative of how much we feel deprived, the absence of a communal life, and that it's very much focused on this. About 20 years ago, psychologists did this huge international study to study happiness, to find out what makes people happy. They didn't call it happiness, they called it subjective well-being, because happiness didn't sound scientific enough. So they did a huge international study, and they came up with 3 factors that contribute to people's happiness. It's often referred to as the 3 Fs. Now, if this were more interactive, I'd ask you to try to guess what they are, but we can't do that. So I'll mention to you, the 3 Fs that are associated with happiness is family, friends, and faith. Now, family and friends, quite obvious. How did they measure faith? How do you measure what your belief system is? So they measured faith by membership in a house of worship, membership in a synagogue, in a church, or a mosque. So those are the 3 things. And then, as we used to say in yeshiva, what's the sada shava b'neihem? What's the common denominator? They're all connections. And connections are so important to us. And I think this frantic attempt to try to reclaim a life with minyan is this recognition of this need for communal connection. I see I've only about 10 minutes left, so let me spend 5 minutes on grief and then 5 minutes on where are we going from here, okay? So the grief piece is very, very painful. And I have to say, even someone who's spent 25 years doing work in the area of bereavement, I don't know if I fully appreciated how important the Levaya funeral is, how important the Kfur is, how important Shiva is, and how important saying Kaddish and the ongoing commemorations are, and how terribly deprived people feel by this missing in their lives. Another thing that's fascinating to me that I don't think I would have anticipated, the one aspect that people are missing terribly, and I hear this again and again, even in the groups, is that when Shiva is over, their life doesn't change that much. Typically, Shiva is over. Sometimes some people have the custom of walking around the block. The reason given, some different reasons given to either accompany the deceased or just sort of symbolic of returning to life. And I'm a Yekka, we don't have that custom, but Shiva's over, and all right, so they can put on fresh clothing and they can take a shower, but they're still home. They're not going anywhere, and they miss that very challenging aspect of the first day back in the office, getting back to normal. And I remember that myself. I remember after I finished in Shiva for my mother, that the first thing I had to do was give a class in a public school on sexual abuse prevention that I've given 100 times. And I walked in the public school and I'm giving this lecture and I'm thinking to myself, this is the stupidest thing I ever did. My mother survived 7 concentration camps. I just finished seeing Shiva for her, and now I'm just doing my job. But that was important, because the challenge post-Shiva is to get back to normal life with these changes, with the new world that you're in. And it's a deprivation, as challenging as it is, that many feel deprived, that they don't have that opportunity to get back into normal life. Now, there is one aspect of certainly Shiva, but of grieving a deceased, which we can still have. And what the approach we're taking is to sort of highlight and emphasize that. And that is that when, we often say that when someone dies, the relationship doesn't end, it changes. It changes from a face-to-face relationship to a relationship of memories, to a relationship of legacies. And it's, by the way, also part of the theme that's happening here is sometimes if there's an elderly parent that's frail and there's a gradual, if you will, deterioration in health, you can brace yourself. But most of the people who have died are very, I'm hearing this theme again and again, never sick a day in his life, healthy, robust, alert, and then something matter a few weeks all alone in a hospital with nobody by their bedside, deteriorate, die. So they're not prepared. But as I said, the relationship changes. The relationship doesn't end when someone dies. It becomes an internalized relationship. It becomes a relationship of memories, of legacies, of stories. And by the way, that's one of the things that just drives me crazy, even in regular shivas. I often tell people that when you pay a shiva visit, it's important to talk about how the person lived, not how they died. Somebody could be 96 years old, and for 95 years and 50 weeks they lived, and for 2 weeks they died, and all people talk about is, oh, he died from that disease? Why did you take him to that hospital? It's not important. It's important that the person lives. And that's why shiva is so important, so brilliant. Because shiva, if done right, launches this process of transitioning from a face-to-face relationship to a relationship of memories. And in fact, one of the things I will do when I pay a shiva visit, even if it's, again, an elderly parent, great-great-grandparent or whatever, is when I come in, again, everybody's talking about how he died, I'll come in, I'll just say to the person, can you tell me a story about your mother? Or I never knew your father, tell me something about him. Or where was he from? Where did he grow up? Something. So, and I often say to people, if when you leave the Beis Avel, you know more about the person than when you come in, you did Nicham Avelim. You did consolation, even if you're quiet and just listening, because that's what's important, and that we can still do. The coronavirus is not stopping it, and therefore I think we need to highlight that aspect of consolation so that we compensate for all the other parts that will be missing. There's so much more to talk about, but I want to get into what's really supposed to be the key point here, which is what's going to happen now? Where are we going? What's going to be? So first of all, I think it's very important to note that when this is over, God willing soon, and we can go back to normal life, don't think we're just going to just wipe our brow and just go back to the way we were. This is going to change, and this is having an impact on us. It's changing us, and we can't just jump back into reality. And we're going to have to look at it short term and long term. Short term is it'll be hard. A very interesting study was done in Nepal a number of years ago by an anthropologist. It seems that Nepal had a situation that's not foreign to us as Jews in our history. Many of us, for the Jews that came from Russia, especially during the turn of the 20th century, there's nothing out of the ordinary for the Tsar to come and take every Jewish kid from 15 to 25 and throw them in for a 30-year conscription in the Russian army. There's many stories about it, many even halachic questions that have come up as a result of this. So it seems they were doing the same thing in Nepal more recently. They would just come into a town and can take kids and put them into the army, and for 30 years or 15 years, whatever, they'd have to be in this army and see horrible atrocities and be separated from their loved ones. And finally, for whatever circumstances, this ended and they came home. And this anthropologist studied how these young kids who were conscripted were greeted when they came back. And he found two patterns. Some towns just said hi and just let them go on with their lives. And others made commemorations, welcomed them back, had special, meals and communal welcomes. And the ones who had the communal welcome back fared much better than those who didn't. And I think that's going to be important as we come back to shul. And as we come back to our communal lives, or as our children come back to school, we can't just say, okay, here you are, we're back again. We need to commemorate it, we need to process it. It's something that has to be addressed. And there's another important point, which is it's not going to be easy. I remember right after 9/11, there was a meeting with local rabbis, and actually a rabbi I'm very close to, Rabbi Yaakov Reisman, the son-in-law of Mordechai Gifter, was speaking, and he shared a brilliant idea, and I think it's applicable here. We all learned that Avram Avinu, Abraham, our patriarch, had 10 nisyonos, was tested 10 times. We have that as established tradition. but the rabbis don't enumerate exactly what were the 10 tests. So there are different versions that more overlap than are different. You know, whether it was having to be thrown in the furnace by Nimrod, whether it was coming to the land of Israel, whether it's when his wife was abducted, the world war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, all these different experiences were among the tests that Avram had. But almost all the commentators say, but the 10th and the ultimate test was the Akedah, the near sacrifice of Yitzchak of Isaac, which makes sense. There's one exception. Rabbeinu Yonah, a noted Rishon, an early commentator, says that was the 9th test. The 10th test was the burial of Sarah. So, you know, I'm not going to minimize the sadness or the tragedy, of losing a spouse, but in the normal course of life, usually, as people get older, one spouse outlives the other. I remember my grandmother, Leah Shalom, used to tell my grandfather that, quote, when one of us dies, I'm moving to Florida. He outlived her by 12 years, served her right. But why would that be the 10th Nisayon? That's just normal life. Why would that be the 10th test? So Arizal went on to explain, according to our tradition, this occurred right after the Kedah. Abraham comes home, he just had a scary event, and he wanted to tell his wife, and he finds that his wife had died. He needed a burial plot, so he had to negotiate for a burial plot. Avram was a multimillionaire. He was a very wealthy man. What he could have done is called over his servant Eliezer and said, listen, I need a burial plot for my wife. I just had the scariest event of my life. I'm 147 years old. I'm no youngster. You know that used car salesman, Ephron Achiti? He has a plot of land. I need it. Here's the credit card. Go buy it for me. But he didn't do that. He went himself. He bowed down. He negotiated, because the 10th Nisayon is getting back to normal life. The 10th Nisayon is going back to the office after Yisod Shiva. And the 10th Nisayon is returning to our communal life when this is all over. And this is not going to be easy. And are we going to learn our lessons? Are we going to grow from this? I want to quote, again, it's a famous quote, and I ask you for forgiveness if it's familiar to you, but Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, who started a whole type of psychotherapy based on his experiences, talks about how he counseled his fellow inmates in Auschwitz, how he counseled them. And he says the following: what was needed was a fundamental change in our attitude toward life. We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach despairing men that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead think of ourselves as those who are being questioned by life, daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and right conduct. Life ultimately means taking responsibility to find the right answers to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. So life questions us. We don't question life. We don't say, why is this happening to me? What do you want from me? And we could replace life with God. What are we supposed to gain from this? And I think this is where we have to start thinking. When this is all over, are we going to be trustful? Will we feel comfortable being close to other people? Will we trust our health system? Will we trust our leadership? Will we be communicating more online, as I mentioned earlier, when all this is over? Are we going to try to make up for missed events? This is a very important consideration. Should we then have the wedding, or should we have the bar mitzvah, the graduation months later? Or is that like doing more harm than good? And I'm almost like throwing them a bone. This is something I think we have to consider. Do we just accept that it wasn't possible? Or do we try to somehow make up for it? Well, is our medical model going to be the same for fighting illness? Are we going to change our whole approach in terms of illness? Will we be humbled? Will we be more frugal? A lot of people are talking about that. Maybe we went overboard with ostentatious events and celebrations. This illness was the great equalizer. I know of people, very wealthy, prominent, politically connected people who were sitting in overcrowded municipal hospitals, treated no different than the homeless guy next to them. So are we going to be a little bit more aware of our humility, how small we are? Are we going to be more grateful for what we have now that we spend so much time being apart? Are we going to be more grateful about friends, about grandparents, about community, about shul? Are we going to go to shul differently? Are we going to approach davening differently because we've missed it so painfully? Nichem Avelim, Bikur Cholim. Are we going to be different now that we couldn't have it? Are we going to approach it differently? Are we going to keep some of that very creative, imaginative ways of teaching and entertaining our children, of connecting, of amusement? Are we going to just put it away and go back to our old lives? Or are we going to keep vestiges of that to be part of it, our lives, even when we are communally connected? These are all questions that I think we have to start thinking about. And we have to start, so that, because God willing, soon we will be able to resume our lives. And we're not going to, life asks us a lot of questions, and we have to come up with answers. Let me conclude with a very beautiful thought from Samson Raphael Hirsch, who says that there's a pasuk in Tehillim in Psalms, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. My God, why have you abandoned me? And Hirsch says that's not how you're supposed to read it. The pasuk should read, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. My God, for what purpose have you abandoned me? What is the function and the purpose? And I think that's what we should be thinking about. And certainly I welcome people to ask questions or share their own reflections on this situation with the few minutes that we do have left. Okay, let me open it up to the community, as I said, for questions, for thoughts, reflections, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. And the floor will be open for everyone to talk, but if someone else has started, please do yield the floor until that person is done. And then we'll ask for the next question. So any questions from the floor?
And people can turn on their video if you want.
I see Dr. David Zucker. Would you like to ask a question?
No, I really enjoyed the talk. I don't want to ask any questions, but thank you very much, Dr. Blumenthal.
Let me add as well that doesn't have to be questions. Maybe there's some thoughts that people had or experiences that they had that I was remiss in mentioning. And
I do have a question. Thank you so much.
Familiar?
Yeah. Thank you. That was really, really insightful, and I have so many things to think about, and I'm really, really grateful.
By the way, this was a yeah. Go ahead.
This wasn't set up. This wasn't set up. This is my stepfather-in-law. I'm so grateful to have. But I wonder. So I've noticed, particularly in our TBDJ community, there's been a huge growth of achdus and a sense of togetherness. But also in times of such crisis and loss, I've noticed within the Jewish community there's a lot of fighting and bitterness and finger pointing. And I wonder, on the theme of where do we go from here, and what happens as, God willing, this situation improves medically. Do you have any thoughts on what do we do to maintain the togetherness, but also mitigate the bitterness and anger, or will that go away?
So it's interesting. There's I think it's a medrash, if I recall correctly, that when Jacob was fleeing, and when that night he had the dream that that there was a stone, he slept on a stone, and it says there were many stones fighting for the opportunity to be the resting place for Jacob, and they all condensed together to one stone. And that's when he said, "Ein zakim beis Elokim," this is a holy place. So somebody said once that he came there, he saw all the fighting. He said, "Ein zakim beis Elokim, this must be a shul," because there's all this fighting. I think that's an ambitious thought. Certainly would expect from no one less than you, Talia. And I hope so too, because we tend to be fragmented. And as I said before, this is the great equalizer. Nobody was spared. And it really, nobody was immune. And also being apart really remind us how close, how much connections, how important connections have to be. And I think that for my sake, what predates that is first of all respecting differences. There are many different ways in which we worship God. And it's not that one's better than the other, it's just different. There's a rabbi in our community who has actually a number of children with disabilities. He has a very good line. He says, the hand has 5 fingers. If they'd all be the same, they'd be useless. And I do hope that does happen. And I think that's a wonderful thought. And I'm glad you brought it up. And we should really work on ourselves in this respect.
I see Monica has a question. Monica, are you able to unmute yourself? And anybody who does want to ask a question or make a comment, if you can put yourself on video if you feel comfortable, and unmute yourself. Monica, you're still muted.
Okay, am I?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm unmuted. Okay, I wish my husband would wish to mute me more. My question is, by the way, thank you very much for your very wise words. But my question is, do you think the young children who are deprived of school and possibly camp and are going to be isolated, how resilient are they going to be?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Nothing ceases to amaze me more in my work in trauma and bereavement than the resilience of children. Children are, in many respects, far more remarkable than we are as adults, and being imaginative and finding ways to cope and adjust. One thing I've heard from some parents is that they learn to get along better with their siblings, because that's their social network right now. So that might be one fringe benefit. And the other thing that's very important in terms of understanding children is that they're extremely adept at letting us know what they need if we listen. I'll tell you one story because it was told over in public, so I'm not sharing something private. Many of you might remember, it was quite a while ago already, the helicopter crash in the Grand Canyon. But if you don't remember, it was about, I'm guessing 25 years ago. It was early in my work in trauma. There were a group of parents who went on Shabbos Nachamu, went vacation in Grand Canyon. They took a helicopter tour they went to Vegas and took a helicopter tour the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, 2 helicopters collided, and all but one were killed, and the one who was not killed was a double amputee. It was a terrible tragedy. And there was one child who was with his grandparents. This happened on a Friday, and he's now an orphan. And they didn't tell him. And the next morning they were walking to shul, and the grandfather decided to tell this child that he's an orphan, that both his parents died. Because he figured in shul, everybody's gonna come running over to them and saying things. So I told him, the kid didn't say a word. They walked another block or two. Suddenly the kid stopped and he looked up to his grandfather and he said, Zaidi, you know how you always say that if you could raise me, you'd do a better job? So now's your chance. Now, if you think about it, that's brilliant. But the kids think, who's gonna take care of me? Who's gonna raise me? So we have to listen to children. We have to be attentive to them. They'll make it clear to us what they need. So thank you, it's a great question. Thank you very much. Anything else, any other input?
Any other questions or comments this morning? Annette, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Good morning to all. Happy Mother's Day. So I don't know if you're aware, but in Quebec, they decided to send back elementary students to school and teacher. And I am an elementary teacher. And I teach Zoom every day, about 3 hours a day. And what I see in my kids' face is fear. And I cannot hide my fear to go back because I fear the worst. And I have a daughter who's very sick at home. How do you approach this as a worker in education, not to transfer and trying to cope as much as you can as an adult, and helping these kids, understand that it's not normal. We're still, social distancing and everything. How are we going to cope with this if we don't put in place psychologists to help them cope and us cope?
Thank you. That was a very wonderful question, and thank you for your openness. Let me tell you something interesting, and I think it's relevant, so I'll mention it. After each tragedy that we deal with, it's interesting that there's usually a leitmotif. There's a theme that emerges. Some of you may remember is about 4 years ago, maybe, I think it's maybe 5 even, the Sassoon fire in Brooklyn. There was a terrible fire on a Friday night in which 6 out of 7 children perished. And we were very involved in the aftermath of that. And I would have to say there was one question that was the most common question we got asked by both parents and teachers. And the question was, can I cry in front of my children? You know, it's everybody, especially within the Syrian Sephardic community where everybody knows each other and they're so connected. So the answer I gave, and I think it's relevant here as well, I said, you can't screech and scream. You know, that's going to be scary. But if tears roll down your cheek as you're talking about it, that's healthy. It's a teachable moment. That, you know, that's being human. And I think we have to do the same thing with our own fear as we process it with our children. We can't make believe we're not afraid. I'm afraid, everyone's afraid. It's normal to be afraid. We go through Bereshit, go through Genesis. Our patriarchs and matriarchs, who were great, great people, had every emotion under the sun. They were sad, they were afraid, they cried. There's nothing wrong with having emotions, but are the emotions in control of you, or are you the master of your emotions? So I think, you know, you're not going to fool children. Children read us like they have radar. And if we're afraid, they're going to know. But it's okay to be afraid during scary times. And what are we going to do with the fear? One of the things we're going to do with the fear is we're going to be careful. One of the things we're going to do with the fear is we're going to sort of surrender to Hashem, to God. So the things we're going to do. So I don't think you should try to hide your fear, because they'll read it in the quiver in your voice. But I think you can show the children, what do we big, powerful adults do when we're scared? And how we try to use it constructively. And that's a very good lesson in life. That's a very teachable moment. And I'd love to tell you, you know, there'll never be another scary moment in their long lives. And maybe if Mashiach comes soon, there won't be. But in the event that might not happen in their lifetimes, there'll be other scary events, and we'll be models for them what we do with fear. My father, Olav Shalom, was a World War II veteran, decorated World War II veteran, who, by the way, put on tefillin every day for 4.5 years in the American Army. And he used to tell me that during battles, particularly Battle of the Bulge, which 1 out of 3 Americans were killed, he used to hear the soldiers say, I'm the first to be afraid and the last to run. So I think that's what we do with our fear. We're going to be the first to be afraid, but the last to run.
Any other questions from the audience? I hear someone speaking. Someone want to ask a question?
I just want to say thank you to Dr. Blumenthal for the entire weekend.
Okay.
I do exist, but Rachel's the professional, and I'm just the guy who likes to get his feet wet in lots of different things. So, yasher koach to everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yair. Your feet must be soaking.
I guess if there are no more questions, I'll just take the opportunity to sum up. This was a weekend that we could not have imagined, Dr. Blumenthal. We do have to have a do-over in person, and we look forward to that. But we made it work, and you were really so easy to work with, and we thank you so much for the flexibility and allowing us, for emailing you at all hours of the day and night. And I think that the common theme here, and you did such a good job of simplifying everything down to its most important themes, which is that all of us stuck in our own homes are missing certain things. And for us in this shul, I do believe, and I've heard this from numerous people, each one of us may have our own things that we're missing, or that we are sad about, or that we're struggling with. But the loss of connection to the shul and to our shul community is really palpable, as it's something that is, we live in a small community and a very close community, and the shul is really, for most of us, or many of us, the center of our world and our community. And I've heard that from many men and women. And I think that we owe a big appreciation to the tech support team, my husband, Huri, and Naftali Jacobs, and a thank you to Natalie Gal for the beautiful flyer, and to John Gal, and to the rabbi and all the other administrators of the shul and the shul team for making sure that although we might be disconnected, that we're doing things like this that help us to stay connected in whatever way we can possible. I apologize. Is it possible we missed Julia Ginsburg? Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, but is it too late?
No, I'm sorry. I summed up, but we're happy to hear your question.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on talking with, being there for family members from afar, especially those with pre-existing mental health difficulties?
I love when the last question is the hardest, right? Sure. So that's one of the most challenging parts of this have been people, again, who have pre-existing conditions, especially psychological ones, but even medical ones. There are a number of people out there who have serious medical conditions that cannot be attended to now because the hospital system is overtaxed and you don't want to expose yourself to the illness. So they're living with that fright too, but even putting aside, but even those with pre-existing psychological conditions. So that's, and even those who have children, for example, with disabilities on the spectrum. We have run a group in OHEL for parents of children with disabilities during this, and take the challenges that the average parent have and multiply it exponentially. And that's what these, and sometimes children who can't understand why they're being confined to the home and have to be forcibly confined to the home. So there's many layers, and certainly those with pre-existing psychiatric conditions. The theme has been that what was will be more when you're in a situation like this. Strengths will be stronger, weaknesses will be greater. And that's very much a template which we have to work with. And so for those who've had pre-existing anxiety or propensity towards anxiety or pre-existing depression or pre-existing personality disorders or even pre-existing psychotic conditions, it's going to be exacerbated by the stress of the environment. Right now, for the most part, we're not fixing or curing because we're in a crisis mode. As a metaphor, I mentioned sometimes, imagine you live in the Midwest and there's a tornado coming and you board up all the windows and you tie down everything that can move. And in the middle of all this, your husband comes and said, in the basement that sink is leaking. What are we gonna do about it? You don't care right now, So we're trying to get through this. And I think the message we're giving to people in those situations is, when this is all over, we're gonna give you what you need. We'll take you right now. We have to do what's necessary just to get through this. And if that means more medication, we're going to increase your medication temporarily so you can get through that. And if that means shielding and insulating you from information, which is another big story I didn't get a chance to get to, is how we process all the bombardment of information that's happening. We're going to do that. If that means indulging you, or if that means you're going to put on a little bit more weight or whatever, we're going to do. But you make it very clear these are stopgate measures to get us through this. Historically, every prior pandemic had a beginning, middle, and end. This one will too. And try to endure the crisis, but we're not fixing, we're not treating depression right now. We're managing it, and then when it's all over, we'll treat it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for the most part. I just don't want to be too specific.
I understand that, and feel free to contact me if you want, if it's more specific. Okay, I'm not going to just publicly announce my cell phone number because, or I'll give David Pelkovitz's number instead. But I would, contact Rachel, and she'll tell you how to get in touch with me. And please feel free to share contact information for anybody else who has a more specific situation that requires that kind of more individualized attention. I'll be more than happy. No charge, all confidential and everything like that. I'll be more than happy to, in my role as the OHIL trauma, in charge of trauma department, be of assistance to you. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that last question. It was an important one, Julia. And I'm happy to be available as well, and connect you with Dr. Blumenthal, or if I can get you to resources that are helpful. I should mention that we do have a list of resources on the Shul webpage connected to this mental health weekend, many of which are free through the government or otherwise. And we just want to say that we really appreciate everything that you've done for us, Dr. Blumenthal. And we know that all these talks have been recorded. So if anybody didn't get a chance to watch Thursday night or Friday for the students, or the Friday pre-recorded message, or this morning, you can watch the recorded. Some were audio because we had some video difficulties, and some the video was more successful. And I've been asked by the tech support team to invite everybody for a lighter, refreshing tour of Old Jaffa tomorrow at 5 p.m. Thank you so much to everybody, and happy Mother's Day, and wishing you all a healthy and safe week.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done. I appreciate it. It was an enjoyable experience.